I have covered speed tuning requirements extensively for Phainon teams, breaking down all the best rotations for playing Phainon. But guess what? Cerydra changes all of it. So here I am to talk about it. Again. For a very quick recap, Phainon's teams have two main goals. Goal number 1 is to achieve all 12 core flames and activate his ultimate early enough into the first wave to where he gets 4 of his ultimate's actions in the first wave. This is ideally accomplished by activating Phainon's ultimate with 68 action value remaining if you have his signature light cone, or 76 action value if you don't have his signature light cone. Goal number 2 is to have enough speed on his supports to where they will remain in the first cycle after Phainon exits his first ultimate. This is achieved by hitting specific speed breakpoints on his supports. Speed breakpoints that I'll of course be touching on in this video. These main gameplay goals for Phainon operate under the assumption that Phainon will always need 2 ultimates to clear within 0 or 1 cycle. His goal is to spend half of his ultimate on the first wave, then spend the rest of his ultimate on the second wave, and then enter a second ultimate and finish off the second wave as quickly as possible, preferably managing to do all of this before the first cycle ends so that he can achieve the 0 cycle that some players insist is the only metric as to whether or not a DPS is worth a damn. Don't listen to those people, by the way. Anyway, on top of these 2 main gameplay goals, Cerydra actually adds in a third gameplay goal. You see, Cerydra has her own stacking mechanic called Charge. It's just called Charge. Or should I refer to it as Military Merit? Peerage? Why did they have to attach so many different names to her ability? Whatever, Cerydra has a charge mechanic of her own that we need to play around. If you need a more fully fleshed out explanation as to how Cerydra's kit works, watch my video breaking down my first impressions of her kit, linked in the description below. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume you understand what Cerydra's charge is and why her whole kit revolves around it. Anyway, Cerydra gives Phainon a third goal of needing to stack up enough charge to get 2 double meteors, or 2 kudamas, during his first ultimate, and 1 kudama immediately when he activates his second ultimate, for a total of 3 kudamas, or 3 extra meteors, all within the 0 cycle. In order to achieve this goal, 2 things need to happen. Phainon must take 3 turns while stacking up his ultimate, both for his first and second ultimate, and Cerydra must be able to get 1 ultimate per Phainon ultimate rotation, meaning Cerydra will need 2 ultimates over the course of a Phainon 2 ult rotation. Basically, energy rope on Cerydra is more mandatory than I initially thought. So, with Cerydra adding all of these new goals and caveats that we need to work around in a Phainon team, I should probably start by answering the hot question on the block. Is Cerydra even worth it on Phainon teams? In short, yes. Cerydra has gameplay issues and kit issues for sure in her current iteration in the beta, but she is still Phainon's best support in spite of these issues. I will dive much more deeply into Cerydra's issues and explain why I think they need to change and how I would like to see them changed in a separate video after this one, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Anyway, we have now mapped out Phainon's main gameplay goals that he needs to achieve in a Cerydra team. 1. Phainon must get his ultimate early enough to achieve 4 turns in the first wave. 2. Phainon supports must be speed tuned to remain in the first cycle when Phainon exits his first ultimate so that they can help him stack back up to a second ultimate all before the first cycle ends. 3. Phainon must take 3 turns while stacking up each of his ultimates in order to stack up enough charge from Cerydra's military merit effect so that he can achieve her kudama effect at the proper timing. So let's just get the team building out of the way first. There is only one way to achieve the third goal of Phainon taking 3 turns each time he needs to stack up his ultimate. Double action advancers. Building a team rotation that goes Phainon, action advance, Phainon, action advance, Phainon is basically the only way to let Phainon take 3 turns while stacking his ultimate. This means Cerydra by default has you slotting in 2 other action advancers as Phainon's other teammates. Side note, technically Phainon can get away with only taking 2 turns if Cerydra casts her skill to give him that 1 extra charge, but the benefits of an action advancer is that it gives Phainon both charge and more stacks for his own ultimate. So double action advancer comps are just the best in slot for Cerydra since it's accomplishing multiple things at the same time. And Cerydra's personal stack generation for Phainon's ultimate is pretty lackluster because her skill is kind of just the worst at the moment, so being forced to use it doesn't feel great. So, there are 5 traditional action advancers in this game: Sunday, Bronya, Sparkle, Remembrance Trailblazer, and Robin. For the purposes of discussing the easiest and, I would argue, the strongest team setup and rotations for Cerydra, I will mainly be discussing a team consisting of Sunday and Bronya, with of course Phainon and Cerydra as the other 2 teammates. But please be aware that the other action advancers can also work as replacements for these slots. So now that we have our team, let's discuss the rotation and the speed tuning required, because surely it's simple enough that we can just dive into it, right? Well, sort of. You see, there are actually a few different rotations that you can build for, depending on the builds and light cones you have access to. So we're going to break this down into 3 different rotations: Speed Boots Phainon, Attack Boots Phainon with Dance Dance Dance, and attack boots Phainon with E2 Bronya. If you don't have Dance 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 or E2 Bronya, then you're probably going to have to stick with Speed Boots Phainon. Yes, Speed Boots Phainon is the real thing now with Cerydra rotations. However, if you do have access to Dance 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 and or E2 Bronya, then congratulations, you can stick with Attack Boots Phainon. I also need to note, if you don't have Phainon's signature light cone, it is much more difficult to achieve 2 ultimates within 0 cycles, but it's technically still possible. You'll just probably need a few more speed substats than usual if you're a user of Fall of an Aeon, or Cerydra should run Dance Dance Dance. Although there is one rotation that already assumes she's on Dance Dance Dance. And even if you aren't able to 0 cycle, the most important thing is to pay attention and follow the general rotation guideline and the order in which the characters take their turns, because getting Phainon's ultimate in the fastest way possible is still beneficial even if you aren't 0 cycling, since the longer you take to get Phainon's ultimate, the more at risk your team is of dying since there's no sustain. Basically, if you think this guide is only for 0 cycling, you would be mistaken. You should try and follow these rotations whether you're 0 cycling, 1 cycling, or even 2 cycling with Phainon. There's a video linked in the description below that showcases all 3 of the rotations we'll be discussing today, so make sure to watch that video to see the different rotations in action. So, without further ado, let's start with the Speed Boots Phainon build in rotation, since this is technically the most accessible out of all the rotations. The speed requirements for this rotation are as follows. Phainon needs speed boots, and that's it. He doesn't need any speed substats, as long as you have his signature light cone. Phainon's base speed of 94, plus his 5 speed from stat traces, plus the 12 speed from his signature light cone, plus the 25 speed from speed boots, plus the 20 speed buff from Cerydra, brings him to 156 speed in combat without needing any speed substats. This is the perfect amount of speed for this rotation, so don't worry about speed subs on Phainon, and let's look at the speed requirements for Sunday, Bronya, and Cerydra. The speed breakpoint for Sunday and Bronya to be able to stay in the first cycle when Phainon exits his first ultimate is around 151. Therefore, Sunday and Bronya must be above 151 speed, but below 156, since Phainon is at 156 speed, and we don't want them going before him. I actually found that Sunday and Phainon need a few speed in between them in order to not get desynced when Bronya advances Phainon. So the ideal speed breakpoints had Bronya at 151, Sunday at 152, and Phainon at 156. Bronya really wants to be exactly -1 speed from Sunday, otherwise she runs the risk of causing Phainon to end up behind Sunday due to the fact that she's advancing Phainon when she's too far behind Sunday. Even 2 or 3 speed in between Bronya and Sunday can cause this to happen. The more speed you have on Bronya and Sunday, the more speed Phainon is going to end up needing. So if you don't want to roll speed subsets on Phainon, try and keep your Bronya and Sunday at around the exact 151 to 152 breakpoint. They can both run Sacrados plus Lushaka or Broken Keel. No Eagle or Von Rex shenanigans are needed for them in this rotation, which is another appeal that this rotation has. As for Cerydra, there are 2 different ways you can play her. First off, we didn't cover this earlier, but Bronya must always be the very last support to take action. Phainon must activate his ultimate after getting the buff from Bronya's skill, which only lasts 1 turn unless your Bronya is E6. This means Cerydra must be faster than Bronya, and since Bronya is -1 speed from Sunday, Cerydra basically needs to be faster than Sunday as well. There are 2 ways you can achieve this, by running Cerydra at around 153 to 155 speed, or by using Von Whack, which still requires her to reach 120 speed to activate Von Whack's effect. Either of these builds will allow her to act before Sunday and Bronya. The benefit to the Von Whack build is that she only needs 120 speed, which you can easily get from substats, meaning she can stay on attack boots. However, the benefit to the 153 to 155 speed build is that it allows Cerydra to use the Passerby set. You see, Cerydra can't use the Passerby set if she's on Von Whack, because Von Whack makes her act first in the team lineup, and Cerydra is always opening with a basic attack. Passerby bringing the team to 5 starting SP would just mean you're wasting the SP from Cerydra's basic attack. But if Cerydra is at 153 speed without Von Whack, then she's taking a turn after Phainon has already consumed 1 SP from the Passerby set, allowing her basic attack to still generate 1 SP. This is why you either go 153 to 155 speed with the Passerby set, or you just go 120 speed with Von Whack and you don't go the Passerby set. It's all for SP purposes, because as you'll see, Cerydra teams are quite SP intensive. Please note that the 153 to 155 speed breakpoint for Cerydra is with her own self speed buff included, so outside of combat, her speed only needs to say 133 to 135, so it's not as daunting as it seems. Also note that her speed buff does not impact Von Whack. Her speed stat outside of battle must say 120 in order for Von Whack to activate. So let us finally break down what the exact rotation looks like. Let's start by assuming you're running Cerydra with the 120 speed Von Whack build. The team starts with 4 SP from Phainon's technique, 2 Core Flame stacks from Phainon's bonus ability plus Cerydra's technique, and 1 stack of Cerydra's charge from her own technique. We open with Cerydra's basic attack thanks to the Von Whack action advance, making her act first, bringing us to 5 SP. This basic attack will give her enough energy to ult, thanks to the energy she also gets from her and Phainon's techniques. And you want to ult as soon as you can with Cerydra, because, as we'll discuss later, Cerydra needs needs one hit of enemy RNG to get enough energy for a second ultimate later in the second rotation. Cerydра's ultimate brings her charge to 3 here, since it generates 2 charge. Phainon goes next with his natural 156 speed, using a skill. This brings us to 4 SP, 4 core flame stacks, and 4 Cerydra charges. Then goes Sunday, who uses his skill plus ultimate. We're assuming no signature light cones or eidolons for right now, so Sunday's turn brings us down to 3 SP, and it gives us 7 core flame stacks. Phainon goes again thanks to Sunday's action advance, using a skill to bring us to 2 SP, 9 core flame stacks, and 5 Cerydra charges. Next goes Bronya, with a skill plus ultimate. With no signature light cone, we go down to 1 SP and 11 core flame stacks. Finally, Phainon takes his third action thanks to Bronya's action advance, skilling to bring us to 0 SP, 13 core flame stacks, and 6 Cerydra charges, activating her peerage effect so that Phainon can unleash a double meteor as soon as he enters his ultimate. Phainon's ultimate gives him an additional stack of Cerydra's charge, which brings us to 7. This is relevant because Phainon will only generate 5 stacks of Cerydra's charge inside of his ultimate, perfectly allowing him to get 2 double meteors during his ultimate, since 7 plus 5 is 12, and each double meteor consumes 6 charge. Now, thanks to Sunday and Bronya being speed tuned at around 151 speed, Phainon is able to take 4 actions within the first wave, and then 4 actions in the second wave. When he exits his first ultimate, all of his supports will still make it into the first cycle. If he clears the first wave in less than 4 actions, then he will be taking too many turns in the second wave, thus pushing his supports out of the cycle no matter how much speed they have built. So you want to spend at least 4 of his actions in the first wave, even if you have to purposefully do less damage to do so. With the entire team still within the first cycle, we begin the second rotation to build up Phainon's second ultimate, all before the first cycle ends. We start the rotation with 0 SP, 4 core flame stacks since we had 1 left over from the previous rotation, and Phainon gains 3 stacks when he exits his ultimate, and then 0 stacks of Cerydra's charge since we spent them all inside of Phainon's ultimate. We'll assume Cerydra goes first again, and Cerydra actually needs to use her skill in the second rotation for 2 reasons. First off is because without her skill, Phainon won't have enough charge to get an instant double meteor on his second ultimate. She needs to use her skill for the charge. Secondly, Cerydra's energy rotation is actually a little scuffed. Even with the energy from her skill that we're using here, she still needs 10 energy from 1 hit of enemy RNG in order to get her ultimate. So pray that Cerydra at some point tanked 1 hit from an enemy, and that'll give her the energy to use her skill into ultimate here to bring us to an immediate 3 charge and 5 core flame stacks. This also brings the team to -1 SP. Obviously this isn't possible, but just to show you how SP negative the team becomes, we're going to keep going while calculating the SP and the negatives. Then, I'll show you the different ways you can make up for all the negative SP. Spoiler alert, it involves light cones. So, Phainon goes next with his higher speed, with a skill that brings us to -2 SP, 7 core flame stacks, and 4 out of 6 Cerydra charges. Sunday goes next as usual, and Sunday's skill won't consume a skill point here, now that Phainon is already under the effect of his ultimate. So we stay at -2 SP, and we gain 1 core flame stack, bringing us to 8 core flame stacks. Phainon's skill brings us to -3 SP, 10 core flame stacks, and 5 Cerydra charges. Bronya's skill drags us down to -4 SP and 11 core flame stacks. And last but not least, Phainon's skills once more to bring us to -5 SP, 13 core flame stacks, and 6 Cerydra charges, perfectly getting the amount of Cerydra charges necessary to prepare a double meteor once he activates his ultimate. Reminder, Cerydra only gets 1 charge on Phainon's first ultimate of the battle, so when he activates his second ultimate here, he won't gain any additional charge from her. That's why it was necessary for her to use her skill in this rotation to get him to 6 out of 6 charges, so he can instantly double meteor before the first cycle ends. So let's address the elephant in the room. Holy SP black hole. The rotation brings us to -5 skill points, meaning we would need to find ways to make up for all 5 of those skill points in order for the rotation to actually work. There are multiple ways to do this. If you have Bronya's signature light cone, that's +1 SP. You can even use multiple Bronya signature light cones if you're able to or need to. If you have Bronya's E1, that's another +1 SP. If you have Sunday's light cone, that's +1 SP. If you have Sunday's E2, that's +2 SP, I guess. But please don't pull Sunday's E2 just for this. It's really not that good of an eidolon, even though it happens to help in this specific scenario. If you have Cerydra's light cone, that's another +1 SP. Wow, isn't it convenient how Hoyo slapped SP generation on the signature light cones of all of Phainon supports? Ironic, isn't it? Cerydra can also hold the passerby set and run 153 to 155 speed instead of the Von Rack build, as we discussed earlier. This would also save 1 SP in this rotation. If Sunday gets hit before his turn, allowing him to ult into skill instead of skill into ult, then he'll go completely SP neutral since his first skill will be on a target that already has his ult buff, thus saving 1 SP for the team with a little help from enemy RNG. And then, even more enemy RNG reliant is the fact that for every 2 stacks of core flame that Phainon gets from enemy RNG, he's allowed to use a basic attack instead of a skill, since the enemies are giving him the core flame stacks he would have gotten from a skill. Each time Phainon basic attacks, that's +2 SP for the rotation, since he's generating 1 SP, but also no longer consuming 1 SP at the same time. Additionally, remember how this rotation is overcapping by 1 core flame stack? This means that only 1 hit of enemy RNG is needed needed on Phainon in order to bring the final core flame stacks to 14 out of 12, meaning one hit of enemy RNG is all we need to allow Phainon to weave in one basic attack instead of a skill. So if we assume Phainon gets to weave in one basic attack with help from one hit of enemy RNG, and if we assume we use Cerydra on the Passerby build instead of the Von Whack build, that already brings us from -5 SP to only -2 SP. If Sunday gets hit by an enemy before his first turn and is able to ult into skill, then we're already only at -1 SP. Bronya's Light Cone or E1 will fix things for us at that point. Or if you have Bronya's Light Cone and Sunday's Light Cone, then obviously you're already good to go from there. As you can see, there are quite a few ways to alleviate the SP issues. Here are the final pros and cons to the Speed Boots Phainon rotation. To summarize, it's a very simple rotation to play and build around, but it can be an SP nightmare, and running Speed Boots on Phainon and sometimes Cerydra if she's using the Passerby set will technically lead to less damage on Phainon since he'll be missing some attack from his boots and from Cerydra building less attack. If you don't have E2 Bronya and you don't have access to Dance Dance Dance, then this is probably the baseline rotation you'll be looking at. But if you do have access to Dance Dance Dance, then it opens up possibility for a different rotation, and probably Phainon's highest damage rotation. And I have some very good news. The speed requirements here will work even with S1 DDD. Your DDD does not need to be S5. One copy is enough. In the DDD rotation, Phainon can run attack boots. The reason he needs speed boots in the other rotation is because Sunday and Bronya need to be above 151 speed to remain in the first cycle after he exits his first ultimate. However, with the use of DDD, the speed requirements on Sunday and Bronya drop drastically, which also allows us to drop Phainon's speed requirements since he can still stay ahead of them even without speed boots. So Phainon with attack boots, plus his signature light cone, plus Cerydra's speed buff brings him to a baseline of 131 speed, which is, once again, good enough. He doesn't need any speed substats. Sunday will be -1 of this at 130 speed. If your Sunday is slightly faster, then that'll mean your Phainon will need some speed substats to be faster than Sunday. But as long as you can lower your Sunday to 130 speed, then Phainon can ignore speed substats just fine. Then, Bronya is at 129 speed. Bronya actually reaches exactly 129 speed with Sakuros and speed boots, meaning you actually want to avoid all speed substats on Bronya. Focus solely on crit damage and defensive substats. That's right, even with S1 DDD, base speed Bronya, with only speed boots and no substats, will still reach the speed thresholds required. As you can already tell, this build is super forgiving. Then, ironically, Cerydra wants to be at least 128 speed. This means the team's speed requirements are the literal perfect -1 setup. 131 Phainon, 130 Sunday, 129 Bronya, 128 Cerydra. If their speeds are a little bit higher, that's fine, as long as they remain in this exact same rotation. Except for Cerydra. Cerydra is an exception. You see, while it looks like Cerydra is running behind Bronya, Cerydra is actually on Von Whack plus the Eagle set in this rotation. Before you groan about needing to farm for Eagle plus Von Whack, take another look at Cerydra's speed requirement, 128. That is incredibly easy to achieve. And it should be noted that this isn't taking into account the speed buff she gives herself. With her speed buff, she'll be at around 148. I just presented it as 128 at the start of this because it was funny to see the whole team exactly -1 speed from each other. But yeah, that 128 speed requirement is for outside of battle. Inside of battle, she'll be at 148. Cerydra will be acting first thanks to Von Whack, and she will need at least 128 speed in order to achieve some shenanigans with the Eagle set that we'll touch upon later in this rotation. If she has more than 128 speed, all the better. Keep in mind that Cerydra literally has 0 good substats that she can roll on all of the attack main stat pieces she's using. So getting speed substats is literally the only thing you can do with her build anyway. And again, in this rotation, she is on the Eagle set with relatively low speed requirements. You can use speed boots if you really want, but you should be able to easily reach her speed breakpoint with only substats. If you're using the Herta Shop Light Cone on Phainon, all of these speed requirements go up by around 14 speed. Bronya needs to hit 143 speed to stay within the cycle with 2 DDD procs if Phainon doesn't have his signature Light Cone, basically. And this is with S5 DDD specifically. The speed requirements will go higher without S5 DDD if you don't have Phainon's signature Light Cone, unfortunately. But don't worry about it too hard. Zero cycling isn't the end all be all. If you do want to build for this though, then building Phainon on speed boots will help him reach above 145 with the help of Cerydra's speed buff, or 125 outside of combat. This is the easiest way to still achieve a zero cycle if you're using the Herta Shop Light Cone, because getting higher speed requirements on Phainon is too big of an ask. So using this double DDD rotation with around a 145 speed requirement is the best you can go for. So with all of that out of the way, here is the rotation. We start with 4 SP from Phainon's technique, 2 core flame stacks from Phainon's bonus ability plus Cerydra's technique, and 1 stack of Cerydra's charge from her own technique. This will always stay the same. Cerydra opens with a basic attack thanks to Von Rack's action advance, bringing us to 5 SP. She then immediately casts her ultimate to advance the rest of the team with Dance Dance Dance. Did I mention Cerydra is holding Dance Dance Dance? Well, this rotation is called the DDD Rotation, so I figured it was a given. But yes, Cerydra is our DDD holder, and she's a great one because she can instantly cast her ultimate after her opening basic attack. Her ultimate, of course, also brings her to 3 charge. She advances the whole team, and then Phainon goes in with a skill, bringing us to 4 SP, 4 core flame, and 4 charge. Sunday's skill into ult brings us to 3 SP and 7 core flame. As we discussed in the previous rotation, if enemy RNG gives him the energy to ult into skill instead, then he would save 1 SP here. But for now, we won't assume that. Another Phainon skill brings us to 2 SP, 9 core flame stacks, and 5 Cerydra charge. Bronya's skill into ult brings us to 1 SP and 11 core flame stacks. And the last Phainon skill brings us to 0 SP, 13 core flame stacks, and 6 Cerydra charge, thus readying an instant double meteor. Then, just like in all rotations, Phainon activates his ultimate and goes to 7 charge thanks to Cerydra's bonus ability. So far, everything is pretty much the exact same as the previous rotation. The difference is that when Phainon exits his first ultimate, the team will not be able to remain in the first cycle. This is because we built their speed too low. Oh no! But you know how to fix that? A second DDD proc, right here in the second wave. Generally, getting 2 DDD procs over the course of 2 Phainon rotations is so difficult for supports because the supports take barely any turns in Phainon rotations. However, a character like Cerydra remedies this issue because of her bonus ability, where she generates energy for herself while Phainon is in his ultimate. Thanks to this, Cerydra is actually able to have enough energy after Phainon exits his ultimate to use her skill into ult, achieving the second DDD proc required to bring the rest of the team back up into the first cycle, despite the team having such low speed. Well, Cerydra almost has enough energy to achieve this. She actually ends up being short by around 12 energy. That's not the only thing short about her either. 1 hit of enemy RNG solves this, since 10 energy gained from an enemy attack equates to 12-ish energy if she has an energy rope and an energy planar. This is generally not too difficult to achieve, but it is technically a caveat that is important to mention. Cerydra does need 1 hit of enemy RNG for not just this rotation to work, but every rotation to work, because every Cerydra rotation needs her to achieve 2 ultimates in order to give Phainon enough charge, not just the DDD rotation. Getting 2 DDD procs is just a bonus of Cerydra's rotations that we're taking advantage of. But yeah, do be aware of this caveat, because you may need to reset if your Cerydra doesn't get 1 hit of enemy RNG in the first wave. Anyway, under the assumption that Cerydra managed to get the second ultimate, and thus the second DDD proc, our team suddenly gets action advance into the first cycle once more, so that they can get Phainon his second ultimate before the first cycle ends. All hail DDD. The team is at 0 SP, 4 core flame stacks thanks to having 1 left over from the previous rotation, and gaining 3 from Phainon's bonus ability, and 0 Cerydra charge. Cerydra opens with a skill into ultimate, giving us a total of 5 core flame stacks and 3 Cerydra charges. But wait! Remember how I said Cerydra is going to be achieving some shenanigans thanks to her eagle set and speed breakpoint in this rotation? Well, this is where it finally kicks in. Cerydra started the battle with the Von Rack action advance, and she has now gotten 2 procs of DDD and 2 procs of the eagle set thanks to using her ultimate twice. So, as long as she's only around -1 speed from the rest of the team outside of combat, the eagle set that procs from this second ultimate is actually enough for Cerydra to action advance herself to move a second time right before the rest of the team. Yes, the eagle set is just absolutely ridiculous. So the start of the rotation actually looks like this. Cerydra skill into ult, and then Cerydra is advanced to move before the rest of the team to use a basic attack to help with SP, all before the rest of the team even moves. Hail eagle set, hail eagle set. Thanks to Cerydra's double action, we're actually at 0 SP instead of -1 SP. This rotation honestly just felt really fun. Seeing Cerydra advance herself to move twice before the rest of the team was just very satisfying, especially since it allows her to essentially pay for her own skill point with the basic attack. Now Phainon gets his turn, and his skill brings us to -1 SP, 7 core flame stacks, and 4 Cerydra charge. Sunday's skill doesn't consume a skill point since Phainon is affected by Sunday's ult, so we stay at -1 SP and go to 8 core flame stacks. Another Phainon skill drops us to -2 SP, 10 core flame stacks, and 5 Cerydra charge. Bronya's skill brings us to -3 SP and 11 core flame stacks. And lastly, the final Phainon skill brings us to -4 SP, 13 core flame stacks, and 6 Cerydra charge, thus letting him unleash a double meteor as soon as he enters his ultimate. So we're left with -4 SP that we have to make up for, and 1 core flame stack left over. Just like in the previous rotation, thanks to that 1 leftover core flame stack, all we need is 1 hit of enemy RNG on Phainon to give him enough leftover core flame stacks to where he can use a basic attack at some point instead of a skill, which would bring this rotation to only -2 SP. Any of the ways to make up for those 2 SP, be it Bronya or Sunday's light cones or Bronya's E1, or just simply Sunday being hit before his turn so he can ult into skill, would be enough to smoothen out this rotation's SP economy. Another benefit to this rotation, and just the use of DDD in general, is that it actually allows Phainon enough turns to take 5 of his ultimate actions within the first wave. This is very, very helpful if you don't have the damage to kill the first wave in 4 actions. It would also technically mean you would need less speed to remain in the first cycle in the second wave because he's only taking 3 actions there. But since Cerydra wants a double DDD proc anyway because she needs 2 ultimates for her charge rotation, this isn't actually all that relevant. Also, our supports are already basically as slow as possible. Bronya and Phainon literally have 0 speed substats in this rotation, so it's not like we can even lower their speed much more than this. Earlier, I called this rotation Phainon's highest damage rotation. This is because not only are Sunday and Bronya allowed to run Sacrados and Lushaka/Keel to focus all of their relic sets on buffing Phainon, but Phainon is also running attack boots, which is the main difference compared to the previous rotation, which had him on speed boots. Additionally, the unbelievably low speed requirements on Sunday and Bronya opens them up to allocate all of their substat rolls into crit damage to buff Phainon even more. In terms of build requirements, this build is just so nice. Of course, the one caveat is Cerydra's build. Cerydra requires the Eagle set, Cerydra requires Von Whack, and Cerydra requires DDD. Investing in her signature light cone is literally not an option here because Cerydra is just so good at holding DDD because she can reliably get 2 ultimates over the course of 2 rotations. As long as you can meet these requirements on Cerydra, this build in rotation is going to feel the strongest. Side note, Cerydra technically doesn't need the Eagle set. The Eagle set is mainly just so she can take a double turn before the rest of the team in wave 2 in order to generate an extra skill point with the basic. But if you have other ways of working around the team's SP, then sure, she can technically get away with only running Von Whack. And just like the Von Whack build in the Speed Boots Phainon rotation, the Passerby set won't do anything with Von Whack since Cerydra will already be bringing the team to 5 SP with the basic attack from Von Whack's action advance. So there's the DDD build. Personally a favorite of mine due to how perfectly everything lines up and how easy the speed requirements are, allowing the build to focus all in on buffing Phainon's damage as much as possible. I also found it to be the most fun build just because seeing Cerydra go twice with the Eagle set before the team is really funny. The last rotation is mainly if you don't want to build so much speed on Cerydra. It's the E2 Bronya rotation. Obviously, as the name suggests, this build in rotation requires E2 Bronya to function. So if you don't have her E2, obviously this section isn't for you. But feel free to watch it anyway if you're just curious. Since this rotation centers around Bronya, let's talk about her speed requirement first this time. She needs at least 158 speed plus Von Whack. You see, this rotation will have Bronya opening with her basic attack, taking advantage of the action advance on her talent plus the action advance of Von Whack. With Bronya on 158 speed, Sunday needs to be at 138 speed in order to stay ahead of Bronya in the second rotation. Sunday does not need the Eagle set, nor does Bronya, and Sunday also does not need Von Whack. So rejoice, Eagle Sunday is officially no longer needed. With Sunday at 138 speed, Phainon needs to be above that. He starts with 131 speed with no substats thanks to his signature light cone and Cerydra's speed buff. So he only needs 8 speed from substats, or roughly 4 rolls of speed, in order to reach 139 speed to go before Sunday. Lastly is Cerydra. I stated this before, but the benefit to this rotation for Cerydra is that she barely needs any speed. In order to move in between Sunday and Bronya in the first rotation, Cerydra only needs 103 speed, which is only 4 speed from her relics, since her own speed buff will put her at effectively 123 speed. However, she will get desynced in the second rotation. In order to fix this, we're running Cerydra on the Eagle set yet again so that she can advance herself to move before the others during the second rotation. But again, fret not, her speed requirement is laughably low in this rotation. So just get attack main stat Eagle pieces and you're good to go as long as you get like 4 speed from substats. No Von Whack required. So let's look at the final rotation, the E2 Bronya rotation. As always, we start with 4 SP from Phainon's technique, 2 Core Flame stacks from Phainon's bonus ability plus Cerydra's technique, and 1 stack of Cerydra's charge from her own technique. Bronya goes first thanks to having 158 speed on the Von Whack set. She opens with the basic attack, bringing us to 5 SP and action advancing herself right behind Sunday and Cerydra. Phainon goes next with a skill, bringing us back down to 4 SP, 4 Core Flame stacks, and 2 Cerydra charges. Sunday's skill into ult takes us to 3 SP and 7 Core Flame stacks. Phainon skills again and brings us to 2 SP, 9 Core Flame stacks, and 3 Cerydra charges. Cerydra goes here, basic attacking and then ulting, advancing herself forward with the Eagle set so that she's moving first in the next rotation. But that's not relevant just yet. Her basic attack brings us to 3 SP, and her ultimate brings us to 5 charges. Then Bronya takes her second turn, with a skill and ult. Keep in mind that this rotation already requires E2 Bronya, meaning we're assuming E1 Bronya is already in this rotation. Therefore, we'll assume her skill does not consume a skill point here thanks to her E1, keeping us at 3 SP and bringing us to 11 Core Flame stacks. Finally, Phainon's skill brings us to 2 SP, 13 Core Flame stacks, and 6 Cerydra charges, which, as usual, becomes 7 Cerydra charges when he uses his first ultimate. it. Normally, Phainon gets desynced from Sunday in the second rotation if Bronya is E0 because it's just impossible to get her to move immediately after Sunday, and thus, she's advancing Phainon to her own effective speed, which is too far behind Sunday. However, thanks to Bronya being E2, the speed buff will allow Phainon to move before Sunday in the second rotation, as we'll see. This, of course, is the reason this rotation doesn't work if Bronya isn't E2. After Phainon exits his first ultimate, the team is perfectly still in the first cycle. We entered the second rotation with 2 SP, 4 core flame stacks thanks to having 1 left over and getting 3 from Phainon's bonus ability, and 0 Cerydra charges as per usual. We'll assume Cerydra goes first here thanks to the Eagle Set's action advance from the first rotation. She needs to skill and then ult, bringing us down to 1 SP, 5 core flame stacks, and 3 charge. Phainon is able to move before Sunday here thanks to the speed buff from Bronya's E2. We go down to 0 SP, 7 core flame stacks, and 4 charge. Now Sunday goes, and we stay at 0 SP due to Sunday skilling Phainon while under his ult's effect, and we go up to 8 core flame stacks. Phainon skills again for negative 1 SP, 10 core flame stacks, and 5 Cerydra charge. Bronya skills and brings us to negative 2 SP since her E1 already activated earlier and will be on cooldown here, and bringing us to 11 core flame stacks. Finally, we get the final Phainon skill to go down to negative 3 SP, 13 core flame stacks, and the perfect 6 Cerydra charges as usual. So at the end of the day, this rotation is negative 3 SP with 1 core flame stack left over. This rotation already assumes E1 Bronya, so technically it's a bit more SP hungry overall. You'll need to find a way to make up for the 3 missing SP without E1 Bronya, since E1 Bronya is already a baseline assumption. As usual, 1 hit of enemy RNG here allows Phainon to basic attack instead of skilling thanks to our 1 leftover core flame stack, bringing the rotation to only negative 1 SP, and easily letting you reach the SP requirements in numerous different ways. So there's the E2 Bronya rotation. While it's similar to the DDD rotation, Bronya has to lose Lushaka for Vanwak, but on the flip side, Cerydra can switch out Vanwak for Lushaka instead, so it's basically the same amount of buffing. And Phainon is also still running attack boots in this rotation for more damage. So these are the 3 different rotations for your Phainon Cerydra team. The baseline rotation is running speed boots Phainon. This lowers his damage the most since he loses attack boots. It's not the biggest damage decrease since he gets so many attack buffs from his team, but it is still relevant. Still, this is the rotation you'll always start out assuming. Then, if you have Dance 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 available for your Cerydra, you can keep your Phainon on attack boots and switch to the DDD rotation instead. This rotation theoretically has the highest damage output thanks to being able to allocate more subsets into crit damage for your supports, since they barely need any speed. It should be noted that if you want to pull for Cerydra's light cone, then you would need to choose one of the other 2 rotations, since this rotation requires DDD on Cerydra. Finally, the E2 Bronya rotation is obviously for those with an E2 Bronya who don't want to run DDD on Cerydra. Of course, you can always still run DDD on Cerydra, it just isn't necessary in rotations aside from the DDD rotation. If you don't have or don't want to use Sunday or Bronya, you can slot in RMC, Robin, or Sparkle into their slots alongside Phainon and Cerydra, and you'll perform just fine. Do note that all 3 of these have their own caveats, which is why they're generally seen as slightly weaker than the Sunday Bronya pairing. RMC, for instance, gives slightly less core flame stacks overall due to not having an ultimate that targets Phainon, which causes the team to rely on Cerydra to use her skill more for more core flame stacks. In general, I would probably still say RMC is my favorite replacement for Sunday or Bronya, since they can still be an adequate stack generator, and their true damage buff is very nice when Phainon is getting so many oversaturated buffs, but I definitely do not prefer them over either Sunday or Bronya. They're nice for allowing people to say, hey, I technically cleared with a lower cost team, I guess. Robin would be the next choice. My struggle with Robin mainly comes from the fact that she makes SP economy an even bigger issue than it already is. But if you have ways of playing around this, then she can definitely be a strong replacement option for Sunday or Bronya. Sparkle is my absolute least favorite choice. Sure, she fixes all of the SP issues on the team, but you either end up wasting her action advance, which causes her core flame stacking to be unimpressive, or you end up wasting her crit damage buff, which causes her damage amplification to be abysmal. Sparkle just wasn't made to be played with other action advance units. You can still make her work, obviously, but god does she feel worse than other options. And then there are other options who aren't action advancers, like Tingyun or Ruanmei or Tribi. These options will all need much more enemy RNG than the action advancers, and they'll require Cerydra to skill spam as well to get Phainon enough charge. So just be aware of the difficulties you'll face when trying to slot these characters into a Cerydra team. So with all the rotations, all the builds, and all the team building discussion out of the way, I want to give some final notes on general Cerydra teams and rotations before ending the video. First off, there is technically a 4th rotation, but it's just the exact same 2-turn Eagle Sunday rotation I discussed in my original Phainon speed tuning video. So go watch that one for a breakdown of the speed requirements for that build. I'll link it in the description below. That rotation does still work, but I've come to like it less than these rotations, specifically for Cerydra. It loses out on Sunday's technique buff, and just overall feels less necessary since it completely ignores Cerydra's speed buff. However, if you already have the build for it, then it'll still work, and it's even the most SP friendly of the rotations. And it's it's definitely still the #1 rotation I would recommend if you're skipping Cerydra. So definitely watch that video if that's the case. Secondly, I know the SP requirements seem very daunting, especially if you don't have any of the necessary light cones, and with a lot of SP being alleviated via enemy hit RNG on Phainon, which we can't always guarantee. Just do your best to work around it, since there are quite a few ways to work around it, and don't stress too much about needing all of these limited light cones or anything. I know it might seem like Phainon teams and rotations require way more specific optimization than other teams, but the only reason it seems like that is because Phainon teams are sustainless at a baseline. Other characters also need to hyper-optimize in this exact same way if they're aiming for a sustainless 0 cycle. So really, Phainon's team optimization isn't so different from other characters if they were building similar teams as him all the time. And lastly, just to address the 0 cycle point again, these rotations are not only for 0 cycling. Obviously, the main point for the exact specific speed breakpoints is to manage 2 Phainon ultimates and 3 Kudamas from Cerydra all within the 0 cycle, but the rotations in general are just the fastest ways to cycle through 2 Phainon ultimates. This is valuable even if you aren't 0 cycling, because the longer you take to get back into a Phainon ultimate, the more vulnerable your supports become due to being a sustainless team. Therefore, whether you're 0 cycling or not, I strongly suggest at least following the rotations in this video. And if you can't hit the exact speed breakpoints, then that's totally fine. The specific speed breakpoints are the part that is more specific to 0 cycling. The general rotation and the turn order in which your supports all take their turn should be replicated no matter how many cycles you're aiming for. And last but not least, the more investment you have in your Phainon, the more you start being able to ignore the need for a second ultimate rotation. E2 Phainons are obviously more capable of clearing in only one ultimate, in which case, the need to optimize around a second rotation becomes much less necessary. There are still some scenarios where even an E2 Phainon would need 2 rotations, such as an APOC or PF or certain bosses that stall like crazy, so it's still nice to know how to rotate through 2 Phainon ultimates as quickly as possible. But yeah, if you end up not needing these rotations because your Phainon is super cracked, then that is entirely possible. One more thing, Cerydra got some changes in the beta to her E1. Her E1 basically now gives 2 energy to a target she uses her skill on. Completely pointless for pretty much every other character, since 2 energy is nothing, but since it activates Phainon's bonus ability that gives him a core flame stack when he receives energy, Cerydra's E1 makes her skill give 1 extra core flame stack now, including on her technique. If you aren't interested in investing in Cerydra's E1, then obviously you can ignore this, but this makes Cerydra's E1 another way to fix SP issues within the teams. In all of the rotations we covered, Cerydra's E1 equates to an extra 2 stacks of core flame, 1 extra stack from her technique, and 1 extra stack when she uses her skill in the second ult rotation. These 2 stacks essentially make up for 1 Phainon skill, meaning Phainon can afford to basic attack instead of using a skill during one of the turns if your Cerydra is E1. I stated in the rotations that if Phainon gets to basic attack, it's plus 2 SP to the overall rotation because he's generating 1 SP while also no longer consuming 1 SP. So Cerydra's E1 is essentially plus 2 SP to every single rotation, making it ironically better at generating SP than her own signature light cone. Not to mention the defense ignore from her E1 is also more valuable than her signature light cone's buffs. Her E1 is essentially just a better version of her light cone in every way. E1 Cerydra with DDD is much better than E0 S1 Cerydra. The stack generation and potential to alleviate SP issues thanks to generating more stacks from her E1 also makes it easier to run other teammates in the Sunday and Bronya slots. Overall, I think Cerydra's new E1 is very strong because of the added stack generation, but we covered how the rotations work without her E1, so don't feel pressured to go for her E1 just because it makes things a bit smoother. You can still perfectly find ways to make things work even without her E1. So that's all there is to say in regards to Cerydra rotations. It all looks very complicated at first, but once you pick which Cerydra rotation and build is right for your account and what you have available, I promise it's a lot simpler than it seems. Once you get a hang of the rotations and you start perfectly cycling through your double ult rotation with 3 Kudamas, your Phainon team is going to feel better than ever, assuming you can manage and work around the SP issues. I personally have E6 Phainon, so the chances of me following my own rotations is pretty low since I can just face roll everything, but if you found the explanation of these rotations helpful for your Phainon, then consider liking the video, and comment down below which of the rotations you're planning on using for your Phainon and Cerydra team. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them, since I know everyone has different account situations that can impact their rotation. There will definitely be more content just like this on the way, including a video explaining Cerydra's current issues and how I would fix her. And I'll also be covering the rest of Cerydra's beta, so if things change with her, you should definitely subscribe so you can get all the information on how the beta affects Cerydra and Phainon moving forward. A Heistlands guide will also be on the way eventually, so please be patient. I've been mostly testing out Cerydra rotations, so it's been difficult to get to Heistlands. And speaking of testing Cerydra, don't forget to check the video linked in the description of this video to see all of those Cerydra rotations in action so you can better understand what the rotations will look like. Thank you so much for watching, and best of luck to all Cerydra pullers, whether you're a Phainon haver or not. Until next time!